think they want to give me a platform. Like, there was a panel, the Ukraine anniversary panel, and so I emailed the dean's office and I was like, hey, like, I've been in Ukraine for the last year, like, it might be a good idea to have me on the panel. I can maybe offer some perspectives. And they're like, no, sorry, the panel's full. And I was like, really? You're going to say no to somebody who, like, literally has been in Ukraine fighting for the last year? And that's part of the reason why I'm just not, like, I don't like I'm just, whatever, I'm going to do my time. And so I got out of the military in 2017. I was stationed in Germany, in Stuttgart, Germany, with 10 Special Forces Group. And I got out because we shifted to a counter-Russia mission. I got there 2 months before Crimea was annexed, so that would have been January 2014. So our whole mission set shifted to countering Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. And I spent 3 years deploying all over Eastern Europe, doing foreign internal defense with foreign militaries, like boosting their capabilities essentially. But I knew that there wouldn't be the willingness in Washington, D.C. to send Green Berets into Ukraine if this war kicked off. I mean, it's pretty obvious. The military is so risk-averse. I think if you asked anybody, especially in the special operations community, what it's like, I think a lot of guys are feeling a little lost in terms of, what their mission is. And I know a lot of guys are very, very frustrated with, the lack of aggressive action by the United States, specifically in the Special Operations Forces community. So I knew it wasn't going to happen, so I got out, did my undergrad in Switzerland in international relations. After that, did an internship with the State Department in conflict stabilization on Lake Chad and Sahel, which is also a dumpster fire. And then after that, I got into SAIS. And thank God I did, because SAIS is amazing. Yeah, especially with the Alperovich Institute stood up last year. There's like a lot of really qualified practitioners here, which is, I think that's the best way to learn is from practitioners. But I've been focusing primarily on cyber operations. So prior to the reorganization, I took like InfoSec 1, InfoSec 2, disinformation, and then I was in one of the information operations courses, and then Alex Orlean's counterintelligence and cyber operations course, but then I quit and went to Ukraine. So that's kind of what I focused on, and that was kind of my career path before I left for Ukraine, and that's obviously thrown a wrench into a lot of things, obviously. So, I mean, it's still a career option, but we'll see where it goes. Pretty sure I've taken every class by Thomas Rid, and I really, really enjoy his classes because it's very much discussion-oriented. I think some students really dislike that format. They really prefer like the top-down method. In that format, I think you get what you put out of it, or get what you put into it. Like you really have to kind of make yourself vulnerable to speak your mind on something, knowing that it may be 100% wrong, especially on like a field that is abstract and cutting edge as like cyber operations or disinformation, things like that. Just generally, I would say my interactions with the professors from the Alperovich Institute have been really warm and really helpful, and like I've really appreciated that. So right now I'm working for the Weatherman Foundation, the Romulus T Weatherman Foundation. It's a privately funded, privately run foundation that does a lot of humanitarian work in Ukraine. They've also done some stuff for the recent earthquake in Syria and Turkey, but I'm focused on Ukraine, obviously. So I might keep working for them. I really enjoy the work that we do. Part of what I do is when an American, or foreigner for that matter, is killed or wounded in Ukraine, essentially because I have a lot of connections at the tactical level to guys who are still fighting, and connections to Ukrainian military commanders and things like that. One of my major tasks is tracking down wounded foreigners and killed foreigners and making sure they get evacuated home and get treated, or make sure the remains go to their parents or their family members with honor. Because as it stands right now, when an American is wounded or killed, government's really not doing anything to help. Part of that is because I think we're being way too risk averse. But I'll give you an example. The VA is not treating any combat-related injuries sustained in Ukraine for our veterans. So I had a teammate in Ukraine. He was a Marine. He fought in the Second Battle of Fallujah. He took shrapnel through the eye and into his brain. And he's sitting in the hospital in Kyiv, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we get him out? And I read online that Landstuhl, the military hospital in Germany, it's basically where all our wounded soldiers would go from the GWOT, from the Global War on Terror. And I read that they were taking 50 Ukrainian soldiers to be treated there. I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like, Landstuhl has a ton of experience with traumatic brain injury. Like, oh, let's get him on the list. So we got him on the list, and what I was told is that because he's an American, they won't take him. But they'll take 50 Ukrainians who are injured, but they won't take an American. So that's just an example, 2 examples. VA is not treating combat-related injuries sustained in Ukraine for our veterans, and they wouldn't take an American at an American military hospital in Germany. So the foundation, who I'm eternally grateful to, they basically arranged for his ground transportation from Kyiv to Poland, and then arranged for his air transportation back to the United States, and got all his medical care taken care of. Because if the VA is not treating him, which is who he relies on for his medical care, I'm like, all right, do I even want to take him back to the United States? Because if he has to pay for his medical care, we all know how messed up the medical system is here. Like, he's going to be like $1 billion in debt for the rest of his life, or have to declare bankruptcy. And this guy volunteered to go fight for democracy in Europe, and like, that's not like how we should treat our veterans, or anybody who's going to defend democracy in Europe. Yeah, I mean, and it's great. Like, the president and Megan Mobbs and our director of operations, like, they're out at the front all the time. Like, we just delivered, I want to say, maybe 20 tons of humanitarian aid to the Bakhmut area. So, like, they're not sitting in Lviv, right? They're not sitting in Kyiv. They're out at the front, like, pushing stuff forward, making sure it gets to the soldiers and the civilians who actually need it. Yeah, so start off with the first part, is why I went. Ultimately, it was because I was going to spend the semester sitting here talking about Ukraine in all my classes. And I was sitting in class, and I was a Green Beret working on counter-Russia stuff. Like, this is what Green Berets are trained to do. Like, the U.S. government has literally poured millions of dollars into my training. Like, I have the knowledge and the skills and abilities to go help. In my mind, if Ukraine doesn't win this war, we're only emboldening Russia to take further action against Moldova, or to essentially annex Belarus, or, God forbid, on a NATO state like the Baltics or something like that. And then essentially what we have, if we don't do anything, I'm afraid that we'll have a repeat of, like, September 1939, where, we're like, appease Russia, which we've been doing basically since the Berlin Wall fell, since the Cold War ended. Like, we've basically been appeasing Russia. Like, if you go back like 30 years, we have Transnistria in Moldova, we have Chechnya 1, Chechnya 2, you have Georgia in 2008 or 2007, I can't remember. Then you have Crimea, you have the Donbass, you have the downing of MH17, you have Skripal poisonings, you have GRU guys blowing up Czech ammo depots. I'm sure I'm missing stuff. There's assassinations with polonium, like, not to mention all the stuff that's actually happening in Russia, so, like, someone needs to put them in their place, honestly. And, like, Ukraine's doing it, and so that's why I went. Like, I think it's, if we don't deal with this right now, it's gonna have really horrible downstream effects for Europe, for European security, for Taiwan. Like, what does it send to? What's the message to Beijing? or she if, we're weak on Ukraine right now and Russia is able to take any territorial concessions from Ukraine. That sends a message to China and other authoritarian leaders around the world that they can return to 18th century style international relations, and it's just not. It's not how this is supposed to work. It's not how the international system is supposed to work in the year 2022, 2023. So unfortunately, it takes really brave people like the Ukrainians, who are the most brave people I've ever met in my life. Never mess with any Ukrainians, trust me. They're doing a great job, but the fact that we're slow rolling them on the kit and weapon systems they need is absolutely absurd. 97% of the Russian army is committed to the war in Ukraine, to the theater of Ukraine. So to think that the Russians are going to, attack Finland or attack the Baltics is pretty unlikely. So what we should be doing is giving Ukraine the weapon systems it needs to decisively defeat the Russian army in the field of battle in Ukraine. So then we can have an actual pivot to the Indo-Pacific where we have our main adversary. So Ukraine is taking the brunt. If they can defeat the Russians, that's one adversary that's taken off the board essentially. So we don't have 2 feet, or we don't have 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in Asia. And then we're like, we've reduced military readiness in both continents. That's what I think is why it's really, really important. I don't understand why people don't see this. Not to mention, offshore balancing is a classically American strategy, right? So we have the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. We don't need thousands and thousands of tanks. We need good partners in Asia and Europe with a bunch of tanks.
So when you decided to go, did you have any idea of how long it might take, or was that irrelevant to you?
My girlfriend would probably say that I told her that I was going to return in August or September. And I did have that plan, but ultimately when I ended up in Kyiv in March, I linked up with some people and they asked me to form a team. And so me and another Green Beret, also from 10th Group, who also worked on counter-Russia stuff, we formed a team and had to recruit people. And he ended up leaving in July. And so really the leadership of the team fell upon me. And so I felt responsible for the people essentially under my command, who were all foreigners. They were all Europeans. I had 13 different nationalities working under me. And so with my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, if I had left, the team would have fallen apart or people would have gotten killed. And so I didn't. I didn't leave until left in December, and then I went back in January at the foundation. I gave everybody the holidays off to go home and see their families. And it's just fighting in wintertime is super dangerous because there are no leaves on trees. So if you're running around as a small unit tactics team, it's really hard to hide from enemy drones, tanks which have really big, nice thermals on them, so they can, in the wintertime, your heat signature pops very easily, and then artillery. So, I make the analogy, doing what we were doing in Ukraine, it's kind of like bringing a knife to a gunfight, a lot of times, because we're doing a lot of reconnaissance in the gray zone, in front of the Ukrainian line, and in front of the Russian line. And, oftentimes we don't have anything that can take out a tank farther than 800 meters, which is a British NLAW. So our ability to reach out and touch something is pretty limited. So that's why I say knife to a gunfight. After you've taken artillery a couple times or been shot at by a tank, you definitely feel like you're carrying a knife.
Were there any language barrier issues?
Not on my team. Everybody on my team spoke English to varying degrees. Some of the Germans did not speak very good English. But on my team, everybody spoke English, and I had a Ukrainian American who spoke Ukrainian and English, and then I had a Ukrainian who spoke both, obviously, and Russian. So like the language barrier was never really an issue. But we did work with a lot of Ukrainian units. So we were kind of an autonomous team. Our first weapons delivery in Kyiv was in an alley next to a cemetery, and a pickup truck just drove up and like dumped the tailgate down, and that's how we got our first weapons. So it's like very like, but like the enemy's at the gates. Like in March, this is Kyiv, so like Kyiv is almost surrounded. So we need to like stem the tide, and so whatever, it's kind of like the Wild West then. But over time that, changed. So right now the way it works is like, it's when you get weapons, it's like drawing them from a U.S. armory. So anybody who's served in the U.S. military understands the accountability that goes into that. Because I think they understand that if they don't keep accountability of the lethal aid that they're being given, if something goes missing, ends up in Germany, or some terrorists get their hands on some of this stuff, like no more lethal aid for Ukraine. So they've really gotten their stuff together on that front because they have to, and the nature of the war has changed from Kyiv to now. No, we would just use our translators. So like the Ukrainian American, and then I had a guy from Latvia who spoke Russian, 2 guys from Latvia. One of them didn't speak very good Russian. And then honestly, language was never a problem, but we did work with we worked with everybody from territorial defense, which is like guys who volunteered to hold the line, essentially. Territorial defense, their like literal job is to hold the line. And then we also worked with infantry brigades who had been working together and training together since like 2015, so they're pretty proficient. And then we've also worked with like infantry brigades who are like full of freshly conscripted guys. And then we've also worked with a little bit with like Ukrainian SOF and stuff like that. So we worked with everybody.
I'm curious if you would have any advice. Say a SAISer watches this video and they want to go fight in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have any advice for that student?
Don't do it. Honestly, like unless you have like solid military experience, I would not do it. When I went into Ukraine, it was like March 6th or March 7th or something like that. I was on the train from Poland to Lviv, and there was like 3 other guys going in to fight with me. One of them was a former Canadian military, fought with the YPG. There's actually a lot of white foreigners who fought with the YPG who are now fighting in Ukraine, which is really interesting. There was a Spanish guy who had just done like private security contracting, no military experience, I think. And then there was a German guy who was a carpenter, and he like fired a gun like a couple times, and he was going to fight. So you get a lot of diversity in experience going over to fight, and that's why I felt really responsible for my team, and that's why I stayed until December. It's because I spent a significant amount of my time and resources vetting the guys I recruited on their team. So I felt responsible for them. I would say our team is probably one of the more proficient ones, more cautious ones, because it is a conventional war like this, head-on-head, artillery, MLRS, lots of mortars, lots of mines. It's unforgiving. Yeah, so when we first started, we were trying to set it up like an ODA, like how a Green Beret team would be set up. But the problem is that it's an all-volunteer unit, so over the course of the year, the entire composition of the team changed like 3 times. So essentially, guys would come for 2 months, 3 months maybe, and then they would go home because people have wives, people have kids, people have mortgages, they have lives. And you're under no obligation. It's not like a contract. You're not signing up for 3 years. So it was really hard to have like a really organized structure. So eventually we just kind of did away with it, and it was pretty much just like, hey, we got a mission, do a full mission planning cycle, comms plan, contingency plans, all that stuff, and it's like, all right, who's going, kind of deal.
Was there a typical type of mission that you would you would do, and who would give you your missions, or did you choose them on your own?
Yeah, so basically the extent of our orders, so we were in March, we did like a couple weeks of training, and then our orders were essentially to go to Kharkiv and like kill Russians. Like that was the extent of our orders. At that time, Kharkiv was still within like the city proper, not the region. So there's Kharkiv city and Kharkiv region. At that time, the city was in artillery range. And so, like, you know, again, enemy at the gates kind of situation where just got to stem the tide and push them back. So there was no like set missions. There was no missions given to us. So we were pretty much fully autonomous. We had to find our own safe houses, like source our own food, source our own water, source our own gas, source our own vehicles. Basically everything. We just got like guns and ammo basically from Kyiv. And then from there, you know, it was doing what Green Berets do, which is basically going out to the front and linking up with Ukrainian commanders and be like, hey, what's the enemy situation? What's the friendly situation? Like, how can we help? Here are our skills. We can do sniper missions. We're proficient with like mines. You know, we could do call for fire with artillery or mortars. We had mortar tubes. So we would do a lot of that. And then that's up until the September counteroffensive, where most of Kharkiv region was liberated. Prior to that, the lines were very, very static. And so there was no like, hey, we're going to take this trench head on. Like, it was kind of just a lot of ping pong back and forth with artillery, and then, you know, sneaking around in the gray zone, planting mines or defusing mines. Snipers, we were pretty successful with snipers in that time frame, because that takes a bit of skill, and you know, a lot of guys in Western militaries have had some amount of either designated marksman or sniper training. And like the Ukrainians at that point, they were running around with like Dragunovs with like, you know, like a tiny scope on it where they can't hit anything past like 600 meters. So when we come in with like a 338 or like a 50 cal sniper rifle, we can reach out to like 1500 meters. And so the Russians aren't used to that, so we'd, you know, find this position, and you know, it'd be a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, because they just hadn't taken that kind of fire yet. So that's kind of where we made a lot of our money. And then the counteroffensive happened, and we jumped on some big Ukrainian assaults, and those are pretty wild. It's pretty chaotic. One of the things that I liked about the team, the way we ran things, is that we were autonomous. So like when we committed ourselves to an action, we had done a full planning cycle. You know, we had contingencies planned. Normally we would have an ambulance like stationed a little bit farther back. You know, we'd have a QRF element in case, you know, the guys who are forward, you know, get into a bind, they can come up and help extract or lay down fire or whatever. When you start doing these bigger assaults, there's a lot of moving pieces, and that becomes really complicated really quickly. I'll give you an example. We were involved in this assault to take a town sort of near Izum. Me and like 8-ish guys, I can't remember how many guys specifically, it was so long ago. And then there was like 50 or 60 Ukrainians. And they had 5 M1113s, which are the like Vietnam era APCs with 50 cal machine guns on them. And we had a little bit like an MRAP sort of style, like a Ukrainian MRAP. It's called a Cossack. With no machine gun on it, because we hadn't got no heavy machine gun like Dishka or 50 cal, because we hadn't gotten one yet. So we push out on this mission, and I'm gonna cut things out just so for clarity, so I'm not talking for 20 minutes. But essentially we push out, we get off the vehicles and immediately start getting shot at by small arms. So like Russians in the wood line with like AKs, AK-74s or 47s or whatever. So you have my 8 guys online, and then I've got a bunch of Ukrainians to the left, a bunch of Ukrainians to the right, and we're taking small arms fire from the front, and then Russian automatic grenade launcher system. So it's like the Russian, it's called an AGS. I don't know what it stands for, but it's like the Mark 19, the Russian Mark 19. It's just like, it's think like machine gun, but it shoots grenades out. That starts landing behind us, and then also like 152, so big artillery rounds start landing behind us. And so we're taking small arms from the front. Things are blowing up behind us. We've got Ukrainians on my left, Ukrainians on my right, and we're all shooting at the guys who are shooting at us. And like normally with American doctrine and Western doctrine, and we significantly outnumbered those guys, the Russians who were shooting at us. There was probably like 7, maybe more guys, and we had 60. And we had 550 cals on the trucks shooting at them. But I knew, like I was like, I feel really trapped right here, right? So we're boxed in, basically. And normally what you would do is you take your squad, or half your squad, or half your platoon, or whatever, and you do a flanking element to come up on like the left or the right of, you know, where you're getting engaged from. But because I have Ukrainians on my left, Ukrainians on my right, like I'm not going to take my guys and go maneuver in front of the Ukrainian line. As you can, I mean, even in the American military, you have friendly fire incidents. So this is why you do like live fire battle drills, which is like squad attack, which is the flanking maneuver I'm talking about. You do that in training a lot. You do like dry, and then you do it with blanks, and then you do it with live ammo, and you do it again and again and again. You do it at daytime, you do it at nighttime. And this was the first time we worked with these Ukrainians, you know? So I'm not going to like throw my guys out in front of their firing line. And so we're basically just sitting there and like waiting and just shooting at these guys, and they're shooting at us. Things blowing up everywhere. And then over the radio we hear that there's a Russian tank moving our way. And like I'm like looking around, I'm like, we have artillery rounds exploding behind us, we have automatic grenade launcher rounds exploding behind us, we're getting shot at from the front, and we have like 2 very light armored like APCs with machine guns on them, and we have an NLAW which only reaches out to an 800 meters, and a tank can shoot very far. So I just about pissed myself, honestly. And so we're just sitting there waiting for this tank to come up and basically just blast us to pieces. And then like probably 10 minutes later, we hear over the radio this Ukrainian tank coming up to support us. And I see the Ukrainian tank drive by, and it's like, there's a scene in Band of Brothers in the Carrington episode where they're getting really messed up by a bunch of Tiger tanks and things like that. Like they're all gonna die basically if something doesn't change, and then a bunch of Sherman tanks like blow through the wood line and like running a bunch of trees over and stuff, and like everybody's like jumping up, like screaming, like yeah. It was like that, you know. It was amazing. And then the Russian tank ran away, and the Russians ran away. But yeah, I mean that's an example of like I don't think American soldiers really understand what it's like to be that sort of paralyzed. You know, my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan was we were always in control of the situation. Almost always in control of the situation. Even when it was going, like, poorly, compared to Ukraine, and, like, a peer-to-peer, artillery, drones, tanks, like, all this stuff, like, we were always in control of that situation. There's no air assets that are coming to, like, drop some 2,000-pound JDAMs on an enemy position. So it's an entirely different beast. That's why it's so important that Ukraine needs like the weapon systems like ATACMS and way more tanks. They need so much more tanks, so many more tanks. Like 30 Abrams tanks it's not even a battalion of tanks. So we're just not doing enough, I think, you know. And the sad thing about it is something like ATACMS would make such a huge difference in increasing the survivability of these Ukrainian units who are like freshly conscripted or freshly volunteered, who have gotten like a couple weeks of training, 3 weeks of training or whatever. It's going to really increase their survivability when they push up against like a Russian line, like they're trying to take a trench line. If you have that ATACMS in the field, you can push those logistical hubs way farther back, like back into Russia essentially. And so the Russians at the front aren't getting the food they need, they aren't getting the ammo they need, you know, not getting the warm weather clothes they need, And so that increases, that like gives the guys who are going up, like doing the really like ballsy offensive actions, gives them like a much better chance at surviving. That's why I'm really passionate about that. I mean, HIMARS, for example, HIMARS range is like, I don't know, like 80 kilometers, I think. ATACMS is like 300 kilometers. And so what I saw when HIMARS was introduced is essentially probably like a 50% reduction in the amount of artillery rounds and mortar rounds that we were getting hit with. So taking that and expanding it out to 300 kilometers, that ATACMS would have huge implications for Russian ability to like continuing operations in Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, I joke that I'm rambling, I know, but I'm just gonna keep going. HIMARS basically saved my life. So anybody who listened to the Alperovich podcast, and I talked briefly about this, where essentially I was getting bracketed by mortars with the enemy drone above us, and it was like textbook bracketing, and the next round was going to land right on our position, and it's just like literally the next one was going to just hit us, and like we would definitely have casualties, and it just never came. So I think that it was like right around the time that we were noticing this reduction in the volume of artillery that was getting shot at us, mortars. I think they just ran out of ammo for the day or something like that. Or the battery on the drone died or something like that. But people don't understand like how much those weapon systems really help. You know? So, yeah. That's why I'm really passionate about it.